Welcome to The Witch's Tales, where you will be immersed in stories of mystery, magic, and drama. Prepare yourself to face unexplained mysteries, bizarre phenomena, and strange adventures that will keep you glued to your eyes. With a captivating voice, we will take you into the world of thrilling stories, where truth and legend collide, making you wonder if everything is really just fiction. My life was supposed to be a peaceful hike through the forest, but now my heart is pounding. My lungs are burning and I can hear the angry shouts and the snap of twigs just behind me. All this chaos because I decided to go off the beaten path. It started out as a perfect day for a hike. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant blue, and the forest was alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. I'd been planning this solo trip for months. I needed to escape the chaos of city life and reconnect with nature. The trail I picked was known for its tough terrain and stunning views far away from the typical tourist spots. As I made my way deeper into the woods, the marked trail started to fade. I pulled out my map and realized I had strayed further than I intended. But the excitement of discovery pushed me on. The trees grew thicker, their canopies blocking most of the sunlight. The forest floor, a carpet of fallen leaves and moss, muffled my footsteps. That's when I first noticed the smell. It was faint at first, just a typical forest scent, but as I walked further, it grew stronger, a pungent, skunky odor that didn't belong. Curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to investigate. I pushed through the thick underbrush, the smell overpowering now, and I could hear voices in the distance. My excitement was mixed with anxiety as I crept forward, wondering what I would find. When I finally broke through the last wall of foliage, I froze. What lay before me was a vast clearing, rows upon rows of tall, leafy plants. Marijuana plants, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, swayed gently in the breeze. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. This was no small operation. It was a massive plantation hidden deep in the forest. Then I saw movement. Two men emerged from a makeshift shack at the far end of the clearing. They were dressed in camouflage pants and had rifles slung over their shoulders. My heart stopped. I realized just how dangerous this situation was. I needed to leave fast, and I needed to be quiet. I carefully began to back away, eyes on the armed men who were too engrossed in their conversation to notice me. I allowed myself a brief sigh of relief. I was almost in the clear, but then I stepped on a branch. The crack was deafening in the stillness of the forest. The men's heads snapped in my direction, their conversation halting. Time seemed to stand still. For a second, then one of them shouted, "Hey, who's there?" I bolted, crashing through the underbrush as their shouts grew louder. "Stop, or we'll shoot." The sound of a gunshot rang out, a bullet splintering the bark of a tree just inches from my head. This was real. They were trying to kill me. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, ducking under low-hanging branches and leaping over fallen logs. My backpack slammed painfully against my spine, but I didn't dare stop to adjust it. Every breath burned in my lungs. My legs screamed for rest, but I couldn't stop. The sound of pursuit was too close. I glanced back and regretted it instantly. One of the men was gaining on me, his face twisted in rage. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the branches that whipped across my face, leaving stinging welts. Ahead, I spotted a steep ravine. Without thinking, I half ran, half slid down the incline. Loose rocks and dirt slid around me, and I lost my footing near the bottom. tumbling the rest of the way. Pain shot through my ribs, but adrenaline kept me going. At the bottom of the ravine, a fast-moving stream cut through the forest floor. I plunged into the icy water, gasping from the shock of the cold. The current was strong, threatening to sweep me off my feet, but I pushed forward. I hoped the water would mask my scent and throw off any dogs they might have. As I reached the other side, I heard cursing from the top of the ravine. The men were having trouble descending. This was my chance. I scrambled up the opposite bank, my wet clothes heavy against my skin. Once I reached the top, I paused for a moment, trying to get my bearings. The forest looked the same in every direction, endless green. I had no idea which way would lead me back to the trail to safety, but I couldn't hesitate. I picked a direction and ran. The next hours blurred together. I ran when I could, walked when I had to, always straining my ears for any sign of pursuit. The forest, which had once felt peaceful, now felt like a prison. Every shadow felt like a potential threat, and every sound seemed like a possible hunter. As the light began to fade, panic set in. I couldn't be in these woods after dark, not with them out there looking for me, but I was hopelessly lost. My phone dead. My map lost during the chase. Just as despair started to overwhelm me, I heard a sound that made my heart leap cars. In the distance, faint but unmistakable civilization safety. I moved toward the sound, hope, giving me the strength to keep going. Breaking through the tree line, I found myself on the edge of a 2-lane highway. I waved my arms frantically, desperate for help. The first car I saw was an old pickup truck driven by an elderly man. "Please," I gasped as he rolled down his window, concern etched on his weathered face. "I need help. Some men are after me." He looked me over, taking in my disheveled appearance, the cuts and bruises on my face. "Get in," he said, reaching over to open the passenger door. As we drove away, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see a truck full of armed men chasing us. But the road behind us remained empty. "What happened to you, son?" the old man asked gently. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. How could I explain what had happened? Would he even believe me? Would he be in danger too? "I got lost," I finally said. "Took a wrong turn on the trail. Been trying to find my way back all day." He nodded, accepting my weak explanation. "Well, you're safe now. Let's get you into town. Get you checked out at the hospital." As we drove, the events of the day replayed in my mind: the hidden plantation, the armed men, the desperate chase through the forest. It all seemed surreal, like a nightmare I'd just woken from. But the pain in my muscles, the stinging cuts on my face and arms, they were real. And so was the fear that still churned in my gut. Those men were still out there, and they knew what I'd seen. We passed a sign welcoming us to a small town I'd never heard of. As the first buildings came into view, I felt a mix of relief and dread. I was safe for now, but what would I do next? Go to the police? Try to forget what I'd seen and go home? One thing was certain: my quiet hiking trip had turned into something far more dangerous than I ever could have imagined. And I had a feeling it wasn't over yet. Felt every bump and twist in the road as my heart raced, a mix of fear and adrenaline flooding my body. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, knuckles turning white as I glanced in the rearview mirror. The men were nowhere to be seen, but I couldn't shake the feeling they were right behind us, hunting us through the darkness. Tyler and Emma were silent in the back seat, their faces pale with fear. Lisa sat beside me, her injured ankle resting on the dashboard. She was holding back tears, but I could see the pain in her eyes. I had to focus to get us out of there, but the thought of what we had just escaped was too much to bear. Every few minutes, I would check the mirror again, but there was no sign of anyone following. My mind kept racing. What had we gotten ourselves into? The tension in the air was thick, but I tried to stay calm for the kids. They didn't need to know how close we had come to disaster. The roads in the Ozarks were winding, narrow, and treacherous. I could barely keep my hands steady as I drove faster than I'd ever dared on those mountain roads. We passed the occasional isolated cabin, the lights flickering in the distance, and I wondered if we were being watched from the dark corners of the forest. I couldn't afford to stop. I couldn't afford to let my guard down. "What's happening, Dad?" Emma finally asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was small, shaky as she looked out the window into the dark woods. "We're just getting out of here, honey," I said, my voice hoarse, trying to sound reassuring. "We'll be okay. We're going to the nearest town, and everything's going to be fine." Lisa squeezed my hand, her pain forgotten in the moment. I could see she was trying to calm Emma down, but I knew this was going to be something the kids would remember for a long time. I didn't know how to protect them from this, but I had to try. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted the lights of a small gas station up ahead. My breath caught in my chest. It was a sign of civilization, finally. I swerved into the parking lot, the gravel crunching beneath the tires. I barely stopped the car before I jumped out. Rushing to the small convenience store, the old gas station attendant was just locking up. His eyes widened when he saw the panic in my face. "You folks okay?" he asked, his voice rough with age. "No," I panted out of breath. "There are people in the woods. We're being chased. Please, you've got to help us." The attendant's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. He turned and locked the door behind him, then motioned for us to follow him to the back of the store. "You need to call the police now," he said quietly. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. My stomach sank. We were too far off the grid. The police couldn't find us here. I looked back at Lisa, who was trying to comfort the kids, and then back to the attendant. "Can you help us get out of here?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. The man eyed us cautiously. "I've seen folks come through here before, folks who didn't want to be found. If you want to get to town, you'll need to take the old back road. It's a long shot, but it's your best bet. You won't be able to use the main highway. Too many folks out there looking for you." I didn't hesitate. I nodded quickly, and we hurried to the old station wagon the attendant had offered to us. He gave me a quick warning about staying off the main roads, then handed me a map with a marked route that twisted through the backwoods. "Don't stop until you're in town," he said. "And don't trust anyone in these parts, especially not the folks who've been living in those woods." We piled into the car, and I drove off as quickly as I could, taking the back road the attendant had given me. The night felt like it stretched on forever, the tension suffocating. Every sound, every movement in the trees made my heart skip a beat. Finally, just before dawn, we crossed into a small, sleepy town. I couldn't believe it. We had made it. But even though we were safe for the moment, I still couldn't shake the thought of those men out in the woods. Would they come after us? Would they find us here? We found a local diner, and I made the call to the police. The relief I felt when I heard a voice on the other end of the line was overwhelming. But as I explained everything that had happened, I felt a knot form in my stomach. Would they believe us? Would they get there in time to stop whatever was going on in those woods? As we waited for the authorities, I kept thinking back to those woods. The way they had seemed so peaceful at first. The way we had been so sure that everything would be fine. But it hadn't been fine. It hadn't been fine at all. I knew our peaceful family vacation had come to an end. What had started as a chance to reconnect with nature had turned into a nightmare. The woods had promised adventure, but instead they had delivered danger. And now all I could do was wait and hope that the authorities could stop whatever dark force was lurking in those mountains. The days that followed were a blur of police interviews and investigations. They eventually found the two convicts hiding in the woods, hiding no doubt from something much worse. The police were able to apprehend them, but the damage had already been done. What we had experienced in those woods wasn't just a random encounter with criminals. It was something darker, something much more sinister. Now, as we continue to live our lives, I can't help but think back to that night. The night we ran through the woods, terrified and desperate, unsure of what awaited us at every turn. And I can't help but feel a deep sense of unease, knowing that we may never truly know the full story behind those woods or the people who live in them. But one thing is for sure, I will never underestimate the dangers that can hide in the dark corners of the wilderness again. The woods may have promised us peace, but they delivered something far worse. And I held my breath, not daring to move. The silence that followed felt unbearable, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't let my guard down, not for a second. Whoever was out there, they were no ordinary hunter. I had no idea how long I lay there, but it felt like hours. The footsteps didn't return, but I knew they hadn't left. They were out there, watching, waiting. As the night dragged on, I barely slept. Every little sound, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent my senses into overdrive. I could feel the cold seeping through my tent, the weight of isolation pressing down on me. This wasn't a camping trip anymore. It had become a desperate fight to survive. The first light of dawn was a relief, though the darkness of the night still clung to me. I wasn't sure how much longer I could stay in this place. I needed to move to get out of the forest. But something told me that leaving the campsite wasn't going to be as simple as it seemed. I packed my gear quickly, my movements sharp and urgent, as though every second spent here increased the danger. I decided to head back the way I came, hoping to retrace my steps and find a safe exit. The forest felt more oppressive now, each tree, each shadow filled with the weight of the unknown. I had no idea what I was really up against, but I knew that the stakes had changed. What I'd found wasn't just an abandoned campsite, it was a warning. As I made my way through the forest, the silence was broken only by the sounds of my own footsteps crunching through the underbrush. I tried to ignore the paranoia creeping up my spine. It was as if the forest itself was conspiring against me, its silence unnatural, its shadows too thick. After what felt like hours, I reached the edge of a dense thicket. I was close enough to feel a fleeting sense of hope. That's when I heard it again, a sound faint but unmistakable. Footsteps, not behind me, but in front. A shadow moved between the trees, too swift to be a trick of the light. My blood ran cold. They had found me. I turned to run, my heart hammering in my chest. My breath came in ragged gasps, my legs already screaming from the exhaustion of the previous night. But I didn't dare stop. I could hear the pursuit, the sound of footsteps picking up pace, the unmistakable sound of someone or something getting closer. Suddenly, I tripped my foot, catching on a root, sending me sprawling to the forest floor. Pain shot up my leg, but I didn't stop to assess it. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to keep moving. There was no time to waste. The footsteps were too close now. I sprinted through the trees, desperate to put distance between myself and whatever was chasing me. The forest seemed to close in around me, each tree becoming a potential barrier, each shadow a hiding place for my pursuer. My mind raced with questions. Who were they? What did they want? Why had they targeted me? The thick underbrush slowed me down, but I kept pushing forward, my body moving on sheer adrenaline. That's when I saw it a break in the trees ahead. The forest opened up into a small clearing, and standing at the edge of the clearing was the one thing I needed: freedom. It was a small abandoned cabin, its weathered structure barely visible against the trees. The door creaked slightly in the wind, its hinges rusty, but it was shelter. I bolted towards it, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't care about the cabin's condition. I just needed to hide, to catch my breath, to think. I reached the door and yanked it open, slipping inside, just as I heard a voice behind me, muffled and distant, but unmistakable. "We know you're in there. Don't try to run." The door slammed shut behind me, and I quickly locked it. My breath came in sharp gasps, my chest heaving. I could hear the voice outside, but it sounded farther away now. My mind scrambled to figure out my next move. Should I wait until they gave up? Should I try to fight back? The cabin was sparse. An old wooden floor, a stone fireplace in the corner, and a dusty table. I couldn't afford to waste time. I needed to find a way to contact help. I looked around the cabin, hoping for some clue or a phone, anything to get me out of this nightmare. Then I spotted something, a small weathered journal lying on the floor near the window. I picked it up, my hands shaking as I flipped through its pages. It was written in the same hurried, messy handwriting as the notebook I'd found at the campsite. This wasn't good. It seemed like whoever had been here had been in the same kind of danger I was now. The entries were frantic, filled with fear, detailing the same unsettling things I had experienced. The sounds at night, the voices, the footsteps in the woods. The last entry was particularly chilling. "They're here. They've been watching us. I can hear them coming." I shut the journal with a snap and placed it back on the floor. I couldn't read anymore. I needed to focus on surviving, on escaping. The door rattled again, pulling me back to the present. Someone was trying to break in. My pulse quickened. I had no time to waste. My mind raced, and for a moment, I considered bolting through the back of the cabin. But I was too late. The door slammed open, and a figure stepped inside, tall, menacing, and unmistakably human. "Don't try anything," the figure said, his voice a low growl. "You're not getting away this time." I stood frozen for a moment, my body paralyzed with fear. But the fear wasn't enough to stop me. I lunged for the window, grabbing a nearby chair to break the glass. As I heard the man charge forward, I kicked the chair through the window and dove headfirst into the dense forest outside. My body hit the ground hard, but I didn't stop. The pursuit resumed almost immediately, the sound of footsteps crashing through the forest behind me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I had no choice but to keep running. The forest was my only chance. Dare to rest for long. My body ached, My muscles screamed for a break, but every time I paused, I felt like they were closing in. The silence of the forest, usually comforting now, felt oppressive, every noise amplified in the stillness. As night fell, I set up camp in a small hollow, hoping the darkness would conceal me. I didn't dare light a fire. Instead, I huddled in my tent, listening to the forest around me, terrified that any sound would signal the approach of the men hunting me. Morning came, and I quickly packed up my hands, shaking as I folded my tent and shoved my gear into my backpack. Every shadow seemed to harbor an enemy, every distant rustle a potential threat. I moved quickly, trying to remember the route I'd taken when I first arrived. I was now deep in unfamiliar territory, no way to contact anyone, and no idea how to get back to safety. By mid-afternoon, the exhaustion began to take its toll. I was thirsty, hungry, and running low on energy. I needed to find a water source, but the dense trees and unbroken wilderness made navigation difficult. Every path seemed to twist and turn in on itself, and the poachers could be anywhere. That night, I set up another camp, hoping it would be more temporary than the last. As I lay under the stars, straining to hear anything out of the ordinary, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The forest was too quiet. The silence felt like a trap. The next morning, I continued moving, my hope dwindling with every step. It wasn't until I found a clearing and saw something that made my heart leap, an old ranger station in the distance. I stumbled toward it, not caring about the pain in my legs, hoping against hope that it wasn't just another mirage created by my tired mind. When I reached the station, I banged on the door, my breath coming in desperate gasps. An older ranger opened it, his eyes wide with shock, when he saw me standing there, wild-eyed and covered in dirt. "I need help," I managed to choke out. "There are poachers out there. They're after me. They're armed. They killed a wolf. Please, I need help." The ranger's expression shifted from shock to concern. He quickly ushered me inside, and as I started to tell him what had happened, I realized how surreal it all sounded. The poachers, the pursuit, the camera trap. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from, but the ranger's reaction was different from others I'd encountered. He believed me, or at least seemed to take it seriously. "I'll call this in the ranger," said his voice, calm, but with an edge of urgency. "We'll need backup. Stay here and try to relax. You're safe now." As I sat in the ranger station, drinking water and trying to collect my thoughts, the ranger radioed for help. I could still hear the shouts of the poachers echoing in my mind, their cold eyes and weapons flashing in my memory. When the authorities arrived, they didn't find the poachers immediately, but they did find evidence, the body of the wolf bullet casings, and even signs that the men had been lurking in the area. But the poachers themselves had vanished without a trace. It was as if they had disappeared into the wilderness, leaving nothing behind. I stayed at the ranger station for the next few days while the search continued. Police reports came in, but the poachers were elusive, and nothing conclusive turned up. I was asked to give my statements several times, but the more I spoke, the more I realized how helpless we all were against something like this. I left Yellowstone a few days later, physically exhausted, mentally drained, and terrified. The poachers hadn't been caught, and their operation was still running under the radar. I thought about those men every time I closed my eyes, wondering if I would ever be able to put the events behind me. Years later, I still don't know if I ever truly escaped the terror that plagued those woods. The forest had always been my sanctuary, a place to observe, study, and connect with nature. But now, whenever I'm out in the wilderness, I can't help but feel that cold shiver up my spine, that terrible awareness that someone or something is watching. The wolves I once studied so closely, now I think about their eyes and what it would be like to see their predators, not in the form of an animal, but a man. Someone who knew the land just as well as I did, but used it for something far darker than conservation. I still carry my camera with me, I still do my work, but now every shot feels like a reminder of how sometimes the most dangerous creatures in the wild aren't the ones with claws or teeth, they're the ones who walk on two legs. To the lake and explore a bit. The sun was shining brightly, and the forest was calm, but there was still that strange, unsettling feeling hanging in the air. As we walked through the woods, everything seemed so perfect. The birds chirped, the wind rustled through the leaves, and the smell of pine was so fresh. But it felt almost too perfect, like something was waiting to disrupt it. When we reached the lake, we found it as serene as the photos had shown, with the clear water reflecting the towering pines around it. But there was something off about the place, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone watching us from the tree line, but there was nothing. It was quiet, eerily so. We spent a while by the water, taking pictures and talking about how we could come back here in the future. But the thought of the scream from the night before never really left my mind. I noticed Jake seemed distracted too. He kept looking toward the forest, as if expecting something or someone to emerge from the shadows. We headed back to the cabin by mid-afternoon, but as we approached, we noticed a figure standing at the edge of the trees near the cabin. A man, tall and dressed in faded denim, was watching us from a distance. At first, I thought it was just someone passing by, but when I looked again, I saw he hadn't moved an inch. Jake noticed, too, his jaw tightening. Maybe it's just someone from the town, he said, trying to brush it off. But as we got closer, the man turned and disappeared into the woods. A chill ran down my spine. Who was he? Why was he out there watching us? We didn't talk much that afternoon. I felt on edge, and Jake seemed to be distracted, his mind clearly elsewhere. It wasn't until nightfall that things took a dark turn. We were sitting on the porch again, just as we had the night before, but now there was a tension in the air that made me uneasy. The stars above were beautiful, but there was an oppressive silence hanging over the place. Just as I was about to suggest we head inside, we heard it again. The scream. This time, it was louder, closer, more desperate. It cut through the stillness of the night, like a blade sending a shiver through my entire body. Jake stood up quickly, his face pale. "That's not an animal," he said, his voice low. "We need to get inside." We rushed into the cabin, locking the door behind us. My heart was racing, and I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. The scream echoed in my mind, replaying over and over. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just someone out in the woods, maybe a hiker or camper. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. There was something very wrong here. Jake tried to calm me down, but he didn't seem convinced either. He kept glancing out the window, his eyes scanning the dark woods. "We should have gone back to town," he muttered under his breath. We spent the next few hours in tense silence, too scared to sleep, constantly listening for any sounds outside. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of leaves in the wind made me jump. I could feel the fear building inside me, but it was the sound of footsteps outside. that pushed me to the edge. I pressed my ear against the window, straining to hear. The footsteps were slow, deliberate. Someone was walking around the cabin. My blood ran cold. Jake noticed the look on my face and quickly moved to the window, pulling the blinds aside, just enough to peer out. He cursed under his breath when he saw what I had feared, a figure standing near the tree line, just out of sight. The man from earlier. We backed away from the window, our breaths shallow. "What do we do?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "We're not staying here," Jake replied firmly. "We need to get to the car now." We grabbed our things and rushed out the back door, moving silently through the forest, trying to avoid the path we had taken earlier. My heart was pounding in my chest, each footstep sounding deafening in the stillness of the woods. As we neared the edge of the trees, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind us, heavy, deliberate. "Run!" Jake hissed. We bolted, crashing through the underbrush, not daring to look back. My legs were on fire, but I pushed myself harder, driven by the terror that someone was right behind us. We burst through the trees and onto the dirt road leading to town. But as we ran, I could hear the sound of other footsteps much closer now. Just as I thought we were about to be caught, I saw headlights. A car speeding toward us, tires screeching. My heart leapt into my throat. Was it a local, or was it them? The car stopped, and a man jumped out. Someone I didn't recognize. His face was tense, and I could see the confusion in his eyes as he looked at us. "Get in," he said urgently. "Hurry!" We didn't need to be told twice. We scrambled into the car, and the man gunned the engine, speeding down the mountain road. Behind us, I could see the shadows of figures emerging from the trees, their forms distorted by the dim light. The man didn't stop. We drove for what felt like hours every twist and turn of the road, pulling us further from the nightmare we had narrowly escaped. Finally, the car slowed, and we found ourselves at a small, inconspicuous motel on the outskirts of town. The man let us out, giving us a brief nod before driving away. We were safe, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't done running yet. As I lay in the motel bed, trying to calm my breathing, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. The man in the woods, the screams, the shadowy figures chasing us, it all felt too unreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. The next day, we left the town as quickly as we could. The people there, the man who had helped us, they all seemed to be hiding something. The town was perfect on the surface, but underneath it was a place of dark secrets and hidden horrors. We never returned to Millbrook. What was supposed to be a peaceful getaway had turned into a fight for survival. And I knew that the secrets of that town would haunt me for the rest of my life. The woods once promised solace, but now they felt like a place of danger, a place where shadows and secrets were just waiting for the next unwary traveler to stumble upon them. Life had prepared me for what happened when I ventured into the remote Rockies, for what was supposed to be a routine assignment. It started as any other assignment, just me, my camera gear, and the serene solitude of the mountains. My goal was to capture the breathtaking, untouched landscapes of the Rockies, focusing on rare wildlife and natural wonders few had ever seen. The first few days were flawless. The weather was clear, and I had the mountains almost entirely to myself. I set up camp at a perfect vantage point where I could observe and photograph the landscape uninterrupted. The air was crisp, and I marveled at the pristine beauty of the place. I snapped picture after picture, completely lost in the joy of capturing nature at its most raw and untamed. Little did I know the wilderness had something far darker planned for me. It was the fourth day that everything changed. I was exploring a part of the mountains, far off the typical hiking trails, when I stumbled upon a clearing I hadn't seen before. The trees around it had been strangely arranged, almost as if they were part of a pattern. At first, I thought it was just an odd natural formation, but then I saw something that sent a chill down my spine. Strange carvings on the bark of the trees. They were crude, almost primitive in design, and depicted figures I couldn't quite place, some with animal features, others almost human. I should have left right then, but curiosity is a powerful thing. I moved closer to the markings, inspecting them through the lens of my camera, when I noticed something else, a metallic glint in the underbrush. My heart skipped a beat as I focused on it. There, partially covered by a pile of leaves, was a weathered, rusted machete. As I crouched down to examine it, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I wasn't alone. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I froze, heart hammering in my chest, as the sound grew closer. Before I could react, a voice low and gravelly called out, "What are you doing here?" I turned slowly, my camera still in my hands, as a man emerged from the trees. He was tall, rugged, and wore an expression that was both curious and menacing. His eyes were cold, piercing. I stammered something about taking pictures, about being lost, but he wasn't listening. The moment I saw the machete hanging from his belt, I knew something was terribly wrong. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice steady, as if he'd said the words 1,000 times. "This place has a way of dealing with outsiders." Panic flooded my veins as I realized I was facing someone who didn't want me here. I tried to back away, but another man emerged from the trees, blocking my escape. They didn't say anything more. They didn't need to. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating, and I knew I was in real danger. With my heart pounding in my chest, I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. The camera was forgotten. The beauty of the landscape replaced by the overwhelming need to escape. I heard them shout behind me, and I knew they were chasing me. I couldn't hear footsteps at first, but I could feel them closing in, as if the forest itself was closing ranks around me. I darted through the trees, desperate to get away, but I couldn't outrun the terrain. The brush was thick, the branches low, and the ground uneven. My foot caught on a root, and I tumbled headfirst into the dirt. I scrambled to my feet, pain shooting through my body, but I couldn't stop. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to keep moving. As I stumbled forward, I glanced back, only to see one of the men emerging from the trees, his eyes locked on me, a wild grin spreading across his face. I pushed harder, ignoring the searing pain in my chest, ignoring the exhaustion that was creeping in. I had to get away. I had to survive. It wasn't until I found myself at the edge of a ravine that I realized how hopeless the situation had become. The drop was steep, the bottom hidden in a sea of trees and rocks. I didn't have time to think. I threw myself over the edge, praying that I would land somewhere that wouldn't kill me. The fall was brief, but terrifying. The wind rushing past me as I plummeted into the darkness. When I finally hit the ground, I was momentarily stunned. The impact left me gasping for air, my body aching in places I didn't know could hurt. But I didn't have time to lie there. I had to move. I staggered to my feet, the world spinning around me, and pushed forward. The river below me was fast, and as I crossed it, the icy water hit me like a punch to the chest. I could feel the current trying to pull me under, but I fought against it, dragging myself to the opposite bank. My clothes clung to my body, weighing me down, but I didn't stop. I knew if I did, I would never get out. Hours passed, and the adrenaline started to wear off. I was cold, exhausted, and disoriented. But somehow I found my way back to a road. A car passed by, and I waved frantically, hoping someone would stop. The truck slowed, and an elderly man pulled over. He seemed confused by my appearance, but he didn't ask questions. I didn't care. I climbed into the truck, and he drove me to the nearest town. At the police station, I gave my statement, but the officers didn't seem to believe me. They were skeptical, brushing off my story as the ramblings of someone who had been out in the woods too long. They went out to search the area I described, but when they returned, they reported finding nothing. No cabin, no machetes, no men. It was as if everything I had seen had disappeared into thin air. I left the police station with no answers, and I haven't been able to shake the feeling that the men who chased me are still out there, watching, waiting. The camera I left behind holds the only proof of what I saw, but I've never been able to look at those photos again. Every time I do, I see the glint of that metal, the figures emerging from the trees, and I wonder if I'll ever be able to escape the darkness of those woods. Survival. My name is Mark, and I've always considered myself a seasoned camper, someone who could handle anything the wilderness threw my way. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened on that fateful weekend in the mountains. It started like any other camping trip, just me and my two friends, Sarah and Tom, looking to escape the daily grind for a few days of solitude in the serene beauty of the Rocky Mountains. The first day went perfectly. We set up camp near a clear stream, surrounded by towering pines, and spent the day hiking, fishing, and enjoying the peace of the wild. As night fell, we gathered around the fire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories under a sky full of stars. It was everything we had hoped for. But as the second day wore on, something started to feel off. The forest seemed to grow quieter. The birds had stopped singing, and there was a stillness in the air that made my skin crawl. I shrugged it off at first, attributing it to the natural ebb and flow of the wilderness. But as we hiked deeper into the woods that afternoon, I began to feel like we were being watched. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but then we stumbled across something strange. It was a circle of rocks, perfectly arranged with what looked like remnants of old, faded symbols etched into the stones. At the center of the circle was a twisted tree, its branches hanging at odd angles, almost like arms reaching out. Tom laughed nervously, saying it was probably just a marker left by previous hikers, but I wasn't so sure. That night, as we sat around the campfire, we heard something. It was faint at first, barely perceptible, but then it grew louder. A low chanting, coming from somewhere deep in the forest. My heart skipped a beat as I turned to Sarah and Tom. Neither of them seemed to hear it at first, but as the chanting grew louder, they exchanged nervous glances. "What do you think that is?" Tom asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and fear. "I don't know," I replied, my voice tight, "but we need to leave in the morning." We agreed to pack up early the next day, but the unease lingered. As I lay in my tent that night, I could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling our campsite. I held my breath, straining to listen, but when I peeked out of the tent, there was nothing there. The next morning, things got worse. As we packed up, I noticed that our food bag was missing. It wasn't a bear. There were no signs of paw prints. It looked like someone had taken it. Panic set in. As I realized we weren't alone, we decided to leave immediately But when we reached the trailhead, we found our way blocked by 4 men. They were standing there just staring at us. They didn't say anything at first, but their eyes were cold and calculating. One of them, a tall man with a scar running down his face, finally spoke. "Where do you think you're going?" He asked, his voice low and threatening. "We're just leaving," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We've had enough." But they didn't let us leave. One of the men stepped forward, blocking our path. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. Suddenly, everything went black. I felt a sharp blow to the back of my head, and then nothing. I woke up hours later in a dark, damp cellar, my head throbbing. Sarah and Tom were with me, both bruised and bloody. We had been captured. I had no idea where we were or how long we had been unconscious. The door at the top of the stairs creaked open, and a man emerged. It was the man with the scar. His smile was gone, replaced by something much darker. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice cold. "Now you're part of the forest. You'll never leave." Over the next few days, or perhaps weeks, time became a blur. We learned the terrifying truth about the people who lived in these mountains. They weren't hikers or campers. They were part of a group that had been living in the wilderness for generations, using the forest for their own twisted rituals. Outsiders like us weren't welcome. We tried to escape, but they were always one step ahead, always watching. It wasn't until Sarah spotted a loose nail in the wall that we found our chance. We managed to free ourselves from our bonds and slip out into the night. We ran for what felt like hours, until we finally found a road. An elderly couple stopped to help us, and they drove us to the nearest town. We went straight to the police, but when they arrived at the location we had described, there was no sign of the men in the cellar or any evidence that we had been held captive. They called it a wild story, one of too much fear and too much imagination. But we knew the truth. The wilderness had changed us, and we couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was still watching, waiting for us to return. I've never gone back into those mountains, and I don't think I ever will, because now I know the truth. Sometimes the most dangerous predators in the wilderness are the ones who walk on 2 legs. Mind focused solely on escape. I had to make it to the ranger station to get the evidence out, to stop whatever was happening in these mountains from going unchecked. But the further I went, the more I felt the presence of those who were hunting me. Every time I thought I heard a noise behind me, my pulse would spike. I couldn't risk stopping for rest. I was afraid that the slightest delay would be the difference between life and death. As the day wore on, I realized how deep I was into the mountains, far beyond what my map had indicated, and I had no idea which direction to go. But I couldn't stop now. Around dusk, I came across a narrow, fast-moving river. It wasn't my original plan to cross, but I knew it was a risk I had to take. The current was strong and the water was freezing, but I had no choice. If I stayed on this side, the men would eventually catch up with me. The only option was to cross and hope I could find shelter on the other side. With trembling hands, I plunged into the river, holding my camera tightly to my chest. The water quickly dragged me downstream, but I fought against it with all my strength, finally managing to scramble to the far bank, soaked and exhausted. The forest beyond the river seemed eerily quiet. No more distant ATV sounds, no more rustling in the bushes. Just the sound of my heavy breathing. I didn't trust the silence, though. It felt like the calm before the storm. I pushed through the underbrush, desperate for a sign of the ranger station, praying that I was going in the right direction. Just as I was beginning to lose hope, I saw it lights, in the distance faint but real. The beacon of civilization. My heart leapt with relief as I stumbled toward the station. I arrived just as the last remnants of daylight faded, collapsing into the arms of the park rangers who were already mobilizing to search for me. They immediately took me in, gave me water, and began to assess the situation. It was only then that I realized just how close I had come to death. I had found evidence of a massive illegal operation, one that had been polluting the streams for years, and I had narrowly escaped with my life. The authorities immediately launched a full investigation, but when they went back to the area, the barrels had vanished. The men who had been guarding the site, gone. No trace of them remained. The investigation continued, but it was clear to me that I had uncovered something far more dangerous than I had originally thought. The people behind it were far-reaching, and they had the means to cover their tracks. As I recovered in the safety of the ranger station, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that they were still out there waiting for me to slip up. Even now, months later, I sometimes feel like I'm still being followed. The sound of footsteps behind me when I walk through the woods. The way the shadows seem to linger just a little longer than they should. I don't go hiking alone anymore. The peace I once found in nature has been replaced by a deep unease, an awareness that there are darker forces at work in the wilderness than I could have ever imagined. And I can never shake the memory of the barrels of toxic waste, hidden behind that waterfall, proof of how far people will go to keep their secrets buried. Sometimes the most dangerous predators aren't the ones we can see. They're the ones that hide in the shadows, the ones who will do anything to protect what they've done. And I learned that the hard way.